The sunlight in Los Angeles, as brilliant as ever, poured through the glass windows of my office and spilled onto my organized documents, the golden light seemingly gilding each page with a warm halo. As a successful attorney, my career was at its peak, but my heart was often filled with invisible pressure and uneasiness. My name is Elliot. I'm 38 years old. I own a law firm of my own, and life seems like it should be full of fulfillment. However, whenever I think of Eliza at home, an indescribably complex emotion always wells up in my heart. She is my beloved wife, and we have been married for 8 years. To outsiders, our marriage is happy and fulfilling, but only I understand that distance and indifference are gradually dragging us to the abyss. Elliot, do you have a minute? The voice of Catherine, a partner in the firm, pulls me back from my thoughts. She stood in the office doorway with concern in her eyes. Sure, come on in. I put down the papers I was holding and gestured for her to sit down. Catherine is a strong and independent woman who has been a huge support to me not only at work, but also in my personal life. She has told me outright that she thinks I should spend more time on my family. You look a little tired. She sat down and looked me over carefully. I laughed bitterly. Maybe a recent case distracted me a bit. Or is it with Eliza? She asked half-jokingly, but I knew her concern was genuine. Instead of answering her question directly, I fell into silence. Eliza is a gentle and virtuous wife. She is the perfect companion in my eyes, but lately she always seems to be preoccupied. We communicate less and less, even under the same roof, as if there is an invisible wall between us. Elliot, if you don't face these problems, they won't go away on their own, Catherine said softly, with a touch of determination in her eyes. I sighed. You're right, I just feel clueless sometimes. Maybe you should try to understand what she's thinking instead of just keeping to yourself. Catherine's tone was soft but firm. Her words put me in deep thought. I had always thought that I had given a lot to my family, but I had ignored my wife's true feelings. Perhaps it was time to make some changes. When I got home that day, I decided to have a talk with Eliza. But when I pushed open the door to my house, all I saw was her sitting on the living room couch, looking a little tired, holding a book in her hand but not flipping through it. I walked over softly and sat down next to her. How are you? I asked tentatively. She lifted her head and looked over at me, a flicker of mixed emotions in her eyes. It's okay, just a little tired. I took her hand in mine, determined to get to know her inside out, starting with this conversation. How long has it been since we've had a good conversation? She smiled slightly, but the smile was a little forced. It's probably been a long time. Silence spreads between us, and I realize this conversation is harder to start than I thought. Just as I was trying to organize my words, her phone vibrated. She puts down her book and picks up her phone, glancing at the screen with a slight frown. Something at work? I tried to pull her attention back. She hesitated and put away her cell phone. Well, kind of. But I always felt that things were not that simple. From that moment on, a question began to grow in my mind. Was Eliza really just busy with her work? Every late night, every missed call, every look of desire to speak made me more and more uneasy. Is the seemingly perfect wife suffering from some kind of unspeakable pain? And can I ever get back to the one I used to talk to about everything? The night was destined to be a long one. The city was still lit up outside the window, and the ice between us was getting harder and harder to break. As time passed, the gap between Eliza and me deepened. The growing sense of strangeness made me reflect on my lifestyle and marriage from time to time. She came home later and later and worked overtime more and more often. I was busy with work, and the rift in my heart became more and more obvious. One Friday night, when Eliza once again told me she needed to work late, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of helplessness as I watched her pack her bag. I'll drive you, I said, not really wanting her to take public transportation alone at night. She paused for a moment, then replied softly, No, Alexander will drive me back. He has time to stop by today. Alexander IT was the first time I'd heard the name, but I didn't think much of it and nodded. The moment she walked out the door, that inexplicable anxiety surged up inside me again. That night, I was alone in my empty home, my mind unable to focus on anything. I couldn't remember a single word of the program that was playing on TV, and the words of the book jumped before my eyes, making no sense. My mind kept wandering to Eliza and the man named Alexander. Time seemed to stretch out indefinitely. I jerked up from the couch when the door lock made a soft click and watched her tired figure walk in. Our eyes met, just for a moment, and she quickly averted her gaze. "I'm back," she said softly, a hint of apology in her voice. "Uh-huh." I forced out a smile. "Hungry? I can make you some dinner." She tried to ease that awkwardness. "No, I've already eaten," I said, words failing me. She nodded and turned to go upstairs. As I watched her back, I couldn't control the suspicion and uneasiness rising inside me. Eliza was becoming more and more unreachable, and I couldn't find any key to enter her mind. During that time, Catherine and I talked more and more. She was always able to pick up on my mood swings and constantly reminded me of the need to communicate effectively with Eliza. But when it came to Eliza, there was an invisible barrier that prevented me from really opening up. Things came to a head by chance. I came home early that day to have an in-depth conversation with Eliza. However, when I pushed open the door, what I saw was her sitting at her desk, intently writing something. When she saw me come in, she quickly closed her notebook, looking embarrassed. "What are you writing?" I asked, trying to break down that defense. "Nothing, just some random writing." Her answer was vague. Looking at her demeanor, that suspicion in my heart grew heavier and heavier. Could it be that she was hiding something important from me? One weekend, I decided to quietly investigate her work. She said she had a project that required her and her colleagues to work overtime on weekends, so I took the opportunity to follow her. From a distance, I saw her walk into a high-tech company, and the name of the company caught my eye: Alexander and Company. Alexander, that name reappeared in my life. Despite my best efforts to convince myself not to be overly suspicious, reason told me that things might not be that simple. I waited in my car for almost 2 hours to see Eliza and a man walk out of the office. They were talking and laughing, and the atmosphere was intimate, an understanding that she and I had lost for a long time. My heart felt like it was being held tightly by invisible hands, and it was hard to breathe. That night, it was midnight when Eliza came home. She was obviously a little surprised and nervous when she walked in the door and realized I was still waiting for her. "You're still awake?" she asked tentatively. "Yes, when you get back." I tried to keep my tone calm, but I couldn't quell the waves inside. She forced a smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't know I'd be back so late." "That's okay." I took a deep breath. "Next time, can you let me know ahead of time?" "I'd be worried." She nodded, but I could tell that her mind didn't seem to be entirely on me. That night, she quickly went to wash up and went to bed, while I had a hard time sleeping. A tidal wave of questions and speculations poured into my fragile heart. Who was Alexander, and was he really just a co-worker with Eliza? Was he and Eliza really just co-workers? The internal struggle and conflict made me even more determined to uncover the truth. I didn't want to believe that my wife would betray me, but I also knew that there were things I couldn't do without facing them. The uneasiness and anxiety that was stalking me like a viper was too much to ignore. Next, I decided to find out more about Alexander and what was going on between him and Eliza. Perhaps it was the only way I could salvage this precarious marriage. After a few weeks, my suspicions and anxieties reached a peak. Every night, I was restless, as if every moment of my life was filled with the shadow of doubt. Catherine saw something strange in me, and she suggested that I pursue the truth myself. She was right. Only with first-hand information could I truly face my confusion. So I started tracking Eliza and Alexander. I hired a private investigator to help me get more information about them. Soon, the detective sent me the first set of photos of Eliza and Alexander in a cafe. The atmosphere looked very intimate. The image stabbed me like a sharp knife. Every picture, every moment, felt like torture to my soul. Eliza's long-lost smiles, her attentive listening expressions, those emotional exchanges that had been exclusive to us, were now transferred to another man. I began to feel an intense sense of loss and anger that I had never felt before. That night, Eliza came home looking a little tired. She remained oblivious to my suspicions and tracking, smiling as usual and bidding me good night. Inside, I was struggling with a storm of emotions. A few days later, I decided to follow Eliza myself, trying to stay close enough to her car to keep her out of sight. With the information provided by the detective, I learned that she was going to meet Alexander, and sure enough, her car ended up parked outside an art gallery. I parked my car silently and stood far away on the corner, watching her and Alexander walk into the gallery. Through the glass window, I could see them standing in front of a painting talking, looking focused and happy. That image stung my eyes, and I couldn't hold it back any longer. I entered the gallery quietly, out of their way. Standing behind one of the huge paintings, I was able to get a closer look at them, and Eliza's heartfelt smile, the way she listened intently to Alexander's words, struck me as strange and painful. Just as I was about to explode with anger and helplessness, I overheard a piece of their conversation, and Alexander said fondly to Eliza, "You should really keep writing. Your talent shouldn't be buried." Eliza smiled and replied, "Thank you, Alexander. You are the only one who understands what my heart is telling me." At that moment, my anger and doubt reached a peak. I couldn't go on like this. I approached them, and Eliza's demeanor changed when she saw me. "Elliot, what are you doing here?" There was obvious panic in her voice. I could ask the same question. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I couldn't suppress the ripples inside. Alexander turned to look at me, not a flinch in his eyes. "Elliot, I think we need to talk." I looked at him coldly, ignoring the man who tried to insert himself into our marriage. "Eliza, let's go home," I said firmly. Eliza hesitated, but finally nodded. As she walked out of the gallery with me, I felt as if my heart had been struck hard and endured pain like I had never felt before. We didn't say a word on the way home. An indescribable depression filled the air. When we got home, I finally couldn't restrain my inner emotions. "Eliza, what the hell are you doing?" I questioned, with unprecedented pain in my voice. She looked at me with guilt and a hint of stubbornness in her eyes. "Elliot, I'm just—" She paused as if searching for the right words. "I'm just trying to find myself, to find something I lost in my marriage." "What are you having with Alexander?" I couldn't help but growl out, asking my most painful question. She took a deep breath and said slowly, "We do have a special connection, but it's more than just love. He makes me feel understood and appreciated, something I've longed for but not gotten in my marriage." Her words were like a sword that pierced my defenses. I couldn't deny that I did neglect her feelings and needs all those years. My career took up too much of my time and energy at the expense of caring and understanding her. However, the anger and pain could not be released to me immediately. I felt the pain of betrayal deeply and at the same time began to reflect on my own faults in my marriage. "What are we going to do, Eliza?" I asked in a low voice, a note of helplessness and exhaustion in my voice. She was silent for a long time before she finally whispered, "Maybe we should talk about it and see if we can still get back to the old US." That night, we finally sat down and had a deep conversation. I listened to her talk about her loneliness and confusion, about her thirst for life and her dreams. I also spoke frankly about my own confusion and inner struggle. Even though the conversation had eased our relationship a bit, I knew that the cracks in the marriage would not heal overnight. We needed more time and effort to face and repair the wounds we had inflicted on each other. Whether we can rediscover our old relationship and spend the future together remains an open question. However, I've made up my mind that no matter how hard it is, I'm going to try my best to get it all back. Because I know that Eliza is the love of my life, and we've been through so much together, and I can't let that be ruined. A difficult night had finally passed, and a new morning brought a new uneasiness. It was as if there was an understanding between Eliza and me to try to find a way out of that heated conversation. Though we both realized that this was just the beginning and that the road ahead would be even more difficult. Over the next few days, our communication continued to carry a great deal of detachment. Although each began to try to understand the other, real communication remained difficult. Every attempt at acquiescence seemed to fill the air with an invisible barrier. One weekend, I decided to take Eliza to a little restaurant we used to love and where we had so many good times. Hopefully, revisiting these memories from the past will help us find some of the connections we once had. Eliza and I sat at a small table in the corner of the restaurant, where the lights were still dim and warm and the music was melodious. The waiter served us wine, and the atmosphere was like a romantic evening from years ago. However, I could sense that her mind was wandering. We carefully launched into some trivial conversation, but what really shocked me was the conversation I overheard on my way back from the restroom. I happened to run into Alexander and a couple of his coworkers who were also at the restaurant. "Alexander, who was that woman you saw recently? You seem to care about her," a young coworker teased. Alexander didn't seem to notice my presence as he replied softly, "She's a very special friend of mine. She needs help, and I just want to support her." The anger in me flared up again, and I couldn't continue to pretend to be calm. I stride towards them and look coldly at Alexander. "That's a nice thing to say, but don't you think you should be condemned for interfering in someone else's marriage?" Alexander was visibly stunned, but quickly composed himself as he looked straight at me without flinching. "Elliot, I never meant to jeopardize your marriage. I just gave Eliza the support and understanding she needed." I let out a dismissive laugh. "Understanding? Do you realize how complicated our lives are? Do you really understand what's troubling her deep down?" He didn't answer immediately, and the atmosphere was at a standstill for a while. At that moment, Eliza noticed our argument and rushed over. Seeing the scene in front of her, her expression was even more complicated. "Elliot, Alexander, enough." There was a firmness in her voice that she had never seen before. "This is not the way to solve the problem." I looked at her, the pain and helplessness in my heart turning into a great disappointment. "Eliza, shouldn't we go home and talk?" She nodded and looked to Alexander, who gave a small nod and turned away. When we got home, we went into the house without a word. Silence filled the air between us, as if it were an unbridgeable chasm. Eventually, I broke the silence. "Eliza, what do you really want?" I asked painfully, my voice filled with hopelessness and confusion. She took a deep breath and her eyes reddened. "Elliot, I want to be understood and loved. I want to find the passionate and dreamy person I once was. But over the years, I've felt more and more lost in my marriage, not knowing who I am or what I really want." Her honesty and sadness made me roll inside. I couldn't deny that it was my neglect and preoccupation with my career that made her feel alone and lost. I felt more pain and remorse than I had ever felt before, but also realized that blaming myself or my wife at this time would not make any difference. "Eliza, we used to love each other like that. Why did we become what we are now?" There was regret in my voice. She hung her head and whispered, "Elliot, maybe we both need to get to know each other again and rediscover the emotions we once felt for each other. That road may be long, but I'm willing to try." Her words raised a glimmer of hope in my heart, albeit faint, but warm. We decided to give each other some time and space, understand each other, and gradually repair this precarious marriage. During that time, I deliberately reduced my working hours to focus more on my family and Eliza. I began to learn to listen to her, understand her needs, and rebuild trust and understanding between us. Eliza gradually began to open up and share her dreams and inner struggles with me. We no longer avoided problems, but bravely faced the pain and confusion hidden in our hearts. We discussed a lot, from sweet memories in the past to difficulties in the present, and each sincere exchange made us feel closer to each other. Catherine also gave me a lot of support and advice during the process. She told me that marriage is not just a union of love, but also a resonance and understanding between two hearts. It takes consistent effort and care to make each other feel loved and valued in marriage. Gradually, the communication between Eliza and I became more and more natural. Although there are still many problems that need to be solved between us, I believe that as long as we are willing to work together, we can still find the happiness that once belonged to us. However, Alexander's presence remains an inescapable reality. The connection between him and Eliza remained a major concern in our marriage. I knew that to completely repair our relationship with her, we needed to face and address this issue once and for all. One weekend afternoon, Eliza decided to have a completely honest conversation with me. She told me that Alexander had given her a fresh perspective and allowed her to rediscover her values and dreams. But she also realized that the relationship was taking a huge toll on our marriage. "Eliza, I can understand how you feel, but you need to make a choice, I said seriously as I gazed into her eyes. She nodded, determination in her eyes. I will, Elliot. It will take me time to sort out my emotions, but I will make decisions that will benefit us both. That night, we embraced each other and felt a warmth that had been missing for a long time. I believe that this was the first step for us to start afresh. Although the road ahead is still full of challenges and trials, as long as we walk firmly, there is still hope that we can find the happiness that belongs to us. Elliot and I gradually became more communicative with each other, but I could sense that she was still making hard choices in her mind. Each night, while she slept on, I would look up at the ceiling in the darkness and think about what was going on between us and where we were headed. We began several attempts to restore our relationship together. Through Catherine's suggestion, we attended a marriage counseling course in hopes of getting to know each other better and repairing our marriage. Part of the program was to have deep conversations that revealed deep emotions and needs. This opened a new door of communication for us. However, one day, as the session drew to a close, the counselor asked the crucial question, Eliza, have you decided what you want for your future? Elliot fell silent, her eyes complex and pained. A few seconds of silence seemed like a century. She finally took a deep breath and said slowly, Elliot, I'm willing to work for us, but at the same time, I need to come to terms with my innermost feelings with Alexander once and for all. Although my heart was still filled with pain and confusion, I knew it was part of the decision process she needed to make. I nodded my head to show that I understood her decision. Over the next few days, she had several in-depth conversations with Alexander, during which I chose to give her space. During this time, I also reflected deeply on my lifestyle and tried to make changes to better care for my family and her feelings in the future. Eliza returns home one late afternoon, looking a little down. She sat on the couch, her gaze quiet and determined. I sat carefully across from her and waited for her to speak. Elliot, Alexander, and I have talked, and we both understand what the emotions are for each other, not just an outward attraction. She took a deep breath. We've decided to end the relationship and stop contact altogether. A complex mix of emotions ran through me, a feeling of relief and a sense of unease. I asked her, Are you really sure? She nodded firmly, Yes, Elliot. I've decided to rediscover our beginnings and pursue our original dreams again. This decision was a major turning point in our marriage. Although Alexander's presence was a thorn in our side, Eliza's decision was a relief to us both. We started to get active and refocus on each other. We spent more time together trying to revive those past connections. We retraced the travel routes we used to take and relived the sweet memories we used to have. We went to the movies, went for walks on the beach, and tried those little things we used to say we would do together but didn't. Little by little, the cracks in our relationship are healing a little. Elliot's career also began to change. I re-examined my focus and stopped making work my entire life and tried to find a balance between my career and my family. I began to involve Catherine more in the management of the firm and took her advice to reduce my working hours and increase my family time. Eliza resumed her dream of writing, and we made a special study room for her, where she focused on her work and I continued to support her and encourage her to realize her dream. Gradually, our communication became deeper and deeper, and our mutual understanding and trust were restored. However, repairing relationships doesn't happen overnight. One evening, we were talking at the dinner table about all those past fights and neglect. She tearfully revealed her loneliness and pain, while I confessed my stress and confusion. We embraced and cried together as we faced the shadows that had plagued us. Ultimately, we understand that marriage requires consistent effort and mutual understanding. Every communication and every relationship is so important to cherish and invest in. Together, Eliza and I have embarked on a new beginning, a path of rediscovering each other and rekindling the flame of love. Although the process was full of challenges, we faced them together and overcame them hand in hand. However, in the process, we also understand that no relationship is perfect. What is important is to support each other in the process, face problems, and grow together. This experience has given us a deeper understanding of the nature of marriage and the meaning of fidelity. Final night, Eliza and I sat on the balcony of our home, looking out over the Los Angeles skyline. Elliot, Even though this journey has been challenging, I'm still grateful that we've come all this way. Eliza whispered against my shoulder. I kissed her forehead softly, feeling the peace and contentment. Me too, Eliza. I'll do my best to always be there for you and cherish every moment we have. So far, those storms and difficulties we have faced together have become the most precious memories in our marriage. Through these, we have not only rediscovered each other's hearts, but also strengthened our confidence in the future. Whatever the future holds, Eliza and I are determined to move forward, hand in hand, into the distant, unforeseen future. As time passed, Eliza and I gradually stabilized our relationship. Although there have been countless frictions and misunderstandings, we both understand that this journey is a necessary part of our growth together. Eliza and I were sitting on the balcony one morning, enjoying the fresh air and quiet time. She had a long-lost peace and contentment on her face, which gave me a slight sense of relief. Eliza, I think we're really starting to move towards a new beginning, I whispered, taking her hand in mine. She smiled slightly. Yes, Elliot. It's been a bumpy and challenging road, but I never wanted to give up. We got our lives back on track, but the experience made us appreciate each other even more. We learned how to communicate more closely and how to understand and support each other. This marriage is no longer a one-sided endeavor, but the result of both parties working together. Alexander's departure also gave us the opportunity to rethink our marriage. Eliza broke off contact with him, and we decided not to have any further discussions about him and to let him become part of the past. We realized that only by facing reality could we find a way to move on. A few weeks later, Eliza's new book was finally published. This is her first work after she picked up the dream of writing again, and it is also a true reflection of her emotional world. Behind those words are her deep thoughts about life, marriage, and herself. At the book launch, Eliza stood on the stage and introduced her work to the readers. Her eyes were full of determination and confidence, and every sentence was full of deep emotion. I stood in the audience, my heart filled with pride and emotion. As she finished her speech and walked off the stage, I walked towards her and gave her a deep hug. Elliot, thank you for your continued support and understanding. I couldn't have done this without you. My eyes moistened and I whispered, you're the one who found the confidence and courage, and it's all because of you. I was just there for you the whole way. At that moment, I realized that we had rediscovered each other and the happiness that once belonged to us. However, life is always full of variables and challenges. One day, during a meeting at the firm, I found a report on a new partnership, a letter of intent with Alexander Corporation. My heart was mixed. Although he was no longer a threat to our marriage, the name still evoked memories in my mind. I decided to be honest about it, and when I got home, I told Eliza about it. Her reaction was unexpected. She calmly said, Elliot, this is part of your career. Don't let the past influence your decision. Once again, I was touched by her understanding and support. I decided to face this challenge and not let the shadow of the past affect our future. Over time, my relationship with Eliza has grown stronger. We have learned to work together to solve problems and support each other in life. Although the road is full of challenges and trials, we are determined to go on because we know that only by being there for each other can we overcome everything. Late one night, Eliza and I were sitting on the bed and we were talking softly about our future plans, our shared dreams. Out of the blue, she asked me, Elliot, if you were given another chance to choose, what would you choose? I held her hand and looked tenderly into her eyes. I would choose the life we have now, and I would choose to face all the difficulties and challenges with you, because these make our bond even stronger. She smiled and nodded. Me too, Elliot. There have been so many ups and downs along the way, but I've never regretted it. Our marriage has been profoundly tested and elevated by this storm. We learned the importance of trust, the need for communication, and how to better support and love each other. In the end, Eliza and I decided to embrace a new future, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. We believe that by working together, we can overcome all challenges and embrace new happiness. No matter how rough and difficult the road ahead, Eliza and I will walk hand in hand into the unforeseen and distant future. Life is always full of surprises and challenges, and every family and marriage has its own trials. Through this experience, I have deeply realized how important communication and understanding are in marriage. We not only need to pay attention to each other's external performance, but also need to deeply understand each other's inner world. Trust and support are the strongest cornerstones in the face of life's difficulties. This experience allowed Eliza and I to rediscover each other and the love and understanding that we had hidden in our hearts. To my readers and friends who have had similar experiences, I hope you can face the challenges of life with courage and find ways to communicate with each other and grow together. Only by working together can we make our marriages stronger and our relationships deeper. May every pair of destined people find their own happiness in this journey and embrace the beauty of the future. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.